It was a great honor to have been chosen and a deeply inspirational journey to learn so much about the Coast Guard along the way. Special thanks to co-chairs Ruth and Greg, who were my primary contacts with the committee throughout, and my commanding officers during the process. I have found over the years that people are interested in the process and how a painting like this comes together, so I'm just going to take a few minutes and show you some of the early sketches and the process. Is that advancing? Okay. So you should see a letter. That was a letter that I received kind of out of the blue that went to a dozen or so of the top marine artists in the country, inviting us at first to express interest in this process. Then later, after resumes and showing our work, portfolio review, CV, references, the committee asked some of us to put together some initial concept sketches. And they were very clear. They said no modern elements and no recognizable people. So the first thing I did was ignore their commands altogether. This is one of the first sketches that I produced of three with a concept, and as you can see, I did have some modern elements in there. But in the end, there was an idea that we should do one imaginary scene that brought together these three elements, taking place outside Boston Harbor, represented with the revenue cutter, the Boston Light, and of course the surf boat and the crew. This was the one they kind of liked in terms of the action depicted and the drama in the surf boat. So the first thing that I did after being thrilled that I won this commission and opening a bottle of champagne was I started to read everything I could get my hands on about the early history of the Coast Guard. All of my paintings are deeply rooted in history, so my research began. I visited the Hull Lifesaving Museum and the Customs House in Newburyport and interviewed a lot of the historians and experts they have on their staff and elsewhere. I visited the wonderful WPA murals at the Coast Guard Academy and the State House. This building is filled with incredible works of art depicting the Commonwealth's history. And then I started to keep a notebook where I would scribble ideas and all of my initial ideas, notes, references. I really want to thank, in particular, Dan May and Sally Snowman for lending me their expertise on lighthouses. Russ, who is an expert on the revenue cutter Massachusetts. Despite having so little on record about her, the two of us together were able to come up with a pretty decent, what we feel is accurate rendering of what she must have looked like. And then finally, Tim Fring, who is the nation's expert on surf boats, shared all of his research with me, which was incredibly useful. So my first sketches were just little ink sketches. Believe it or not, this is the very first sketch that I came up with. It looks like a bunch of scribbles. It took me maybe 15 seconds. But that was the genesis of the idea. And then I began to sketch, obviously, these three elements in more detail that I knew eventually I was going to composite into one scene. And this is probably my earliest sketch that brought together these three elements into a dynamic composition. While I was doing my research, I gathered hundreds of photographs. This is one that particularly stuck out at me, which I found it at the Hull Lifesaving Museum. And there was one element in it that went off like an oil lamp over my head. I thought that I could incorporate the handheld lantern to create a dramatic light source and an emotional center for the painting. So this is one of my early sketches that now is illuminated with a light source. Part of the process, once I know exactly where all my figures I want to have posed, I will pose a human model after my sketches so that I can get the light source right and the anatomy right. This young man, who you see here on the left, was a Coast Guard Academy Cadet First Class, now Ensign Nate Pokris, who is the grandson, obviously, of Bob Pokris, who posed for my mural project, and you can see him there in my backyard. This was a more detailed final value study. I did several of these color studies, sketches that got more and more and more involved. There were a lot of back and forth with the committee on my progress, and they could not have been more generous in their support and encouragement. This is actually my final color study, which is about a quarter of the size of the finished mural. We even went as far as to put a paper mock-up of the mural, full size, on the wall so that everybody could get a look at it. And then I started painting in earnest. My little studio in Mystic is too small to have allowed this work to be done. So I was fortunate that there was an empty storefront right across the street, which used to be the bookstore and will soon be a lovely jewelry store that stood empty last summer when I needed a place to work. And I want to thank John Green of Lux Bond and Green for his allowing me to use his space. You can see I'm just beginning to put in the grisaille, or the underpainting monochromatic here. Oh. Sorry. It's probably my mom. Wondering how it's going. Anyway, so here it is, the finished painting. And you're probably wondering how we got it from Mystic, this giant thing, onto the wall here. So here's what I did. I called my friend, Admiral Mike, who flew in with his Jayhawk helicopter. That didn't really happen. Anyway, thank you for your assistance. The back of the mural was designed to actually come apart. It's has braces, aluminum braces. They came apart to allow a gentle folding in half of the mural, and then transportation here, which was a nerve-wracking day. Here we are putting it up on the wall with the help of a couple of young Coast Guard crew. And I want to say a special thank you to Cameron Dortz, who is a master carver who did a beautiful job carving the header board for this piece. Finally, I really want to thank my wife, Laura, who has watched my career arc here. It's been there all along for 25 years for her unwavering support, encouragement, and enthusiasm. I also want to thank all my friends from Mystic, friends and family members, my sister who came in from Georgia, and my brother-in-law, and my sister-in-law, and half the town of Mystic is here. And I'm so grateful to have them here with me. In conclusion, the Massachusetts origins of the Coast Guard and the heroism and sacrifice of its service members is an extraordinary story to tell. And I was greatly inspired by the opportunity to tell it. Thank you very much.